The early 2000s were a time of bold fashion, explosive pop culture moments, and, let's be honest, a lot of problematic messaging. In this video, we're going to dive into how the male gaze in media during this era reinforced mass misogyny, shaping how we saw women, how women saw themselves, and how society viewed gender dynamics. Today I will be talking about something that's often overlooked when we look back at the media of the early 2000s, the male gaze. This visual and narrative framework was everywhere in movies, TV shows, music videos, and advertisements, and it didn't just affect how women were portrayed. It affected how we, as a society, understood gender, power, and sexuality. You probably remember the hypersexualized characters, the glossy perfection of pop icons like Britney Spears and Jessica Simpson, or the way women were often reduced to objects of desire in blockbuster films. But what we're going to explore here is how all of this wasn't just about individual taste or style. It was part of a larger, deeply ingrained pattern of mass misogyny. Let's break it down. The male gaze, a term coined by feminist film theorist Laura Mulvey in her 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, describes how visual media is often created from a male perspective, placing women in the role of object to be looked at, desired, and consumed. The man controls the film fantasy and also emerges as the representative of power in a further sense, as the bearer of the look of the spectator. Laura Mulvey. In many of these films and shows, the camera lingered on women's bodies in ways that didn't serve the narrative, but rather showcased them as objects of desire. Take Charlie's Angels. Sure, it was a film about female empowerment, but look at how often the camera emphasizes the actresses' bodies in slow-motion shots or tight angles. Even in films where women were portrayed as strong, the gaze often reinforced a traditional idea of femininity tied to beauty, youth, and sex appeal. And then there were the music videos. Pop icons like Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Jessica Simpson were frequently positioned in hypersexualized ways, often putting their bodies front and center, reinforcing the idea that women's value was in their looks and their sexual appeal. These videos were more than just pop culture. They were instructional guides on how women were supposed to be seen and how they were supposed to act. Advertisers weren't much better. Ads during the 2000s routinely used women's bodies to sell everything from cars to perfume. The implicit message was clear: women's worth was intrinsically tied to their physical appearance and their ability to be desired. But the issue isn't just about objectification, it's about the message this sends. Women exist for the pleasure of the male viewer, and that's where mass misogyny comes into play. The early 2000s also saw a rise in certain types of mainstream media narratives, especially in celebrity culture, that both fueled and reflected mass misogyny. It was the era of celebrity gossip, reality TV, and the rise of the bimbo stereotype. Women like Paris Hilton, Pamela Anderson, and Lindsay Lohan were often portrayed as either ditzy, shallow, or, in some cases, deserving of public shaming. The media loved to reduce them to their physicality, often without acknowledging their talents, intelligence, or humanity. It wasn't just that women were objectified, they were vilified when they didn't conform to the ideal. Britney Spears' public breakdown, for example, became a media spectacle. The once innocent pop star was ridiculed for every misstep, every personal crisis, and her worth continually reduced to how well she adhered to society's expectations of beauty and behavior. The thing is, these representations didn't exist in a vacuum. They were part of a larger cultural climate where misogynistic ideas about women were normalized, even glorified. The early 2000s saw the rise of lad mags, locker room humor, and the increasing sexualization of teenage girls, ideas that laid the groundwork for toxic culture in everything from online bullying to the rise of bros and incels later on.
They believe that women are evil, narcissistic, dishonest, and manipulative. The sexual market is unfair, and women have a privileged position in that marketplace. Males are being oppressed by women. They believe that masculine norms involving aggression should be legitimized, and they believe that violence is a potential solution to their problems. Essentially, incels believe that men are a marginalized group, and two groups are responsible for this: women who reject them and the men who the women do not reject.
But here's the thing, there was pushback too. Feminist movements and voices in media began challenging the way women were being portrayed, critiquing the over-sexualization, and offering new narratives that celebrated women as whole people, not just objects of desire. Think of the rise of shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or films like Legally Blonde, where women were portrayed as more complex and multidimensional. These movements began to lay the foundation for a more inclusive, nuanced, and empowered vision of femininity that continues to evolve today. While there's still much work to do, the conversations around the male gaze, body autonomy, and gender expectations have come a long way. So what can we learn from all this? Well, the male gaze wasn't just a harmless aspect of early 2000s media, it was a reflection of broader cultural attitudes towards women. And while it's easy to point fingers at the media of the time, it's important to understand how those narratives influenced the way society, especially young people, understood gender and power. But the good news is, as we continue to challenge these outdated norms, we're creating new narratives, new ways to see women and their power in all its forms. The unconscious of patriarchal society has structured film form, Laura Mulvey. But if we turn our attention to it, raise awareness, and encourage critical thinking, we come closer to dismantling the male gaze from impacting women. The work continues, but every step forward is a step toward more equality, more visibility, and more freedom for everyone. Thank you so much for watching my video essay on the impact of the male gaze during the early 2000s. And thank you, Professor Chavez, for a wonderful quarter. I genuinely learned so much, and I am thankful that you got to be the one teaching me this class. Hope you have a good winter break.